before you take them.
We want to take advantage of this area as the highest concentration of cannabis centers anywhere in the world. If you're looking for cannabis in Colorado, you should come to the Green Mile.
Colorado Harvest Company.
World Viral TV is brought to you, as always, by Colorado Harvest Company.
Colorado Harvest Company.
People are coming from all over the world to check out Denver's growing cannabis industry. And most of them are leaving happy after they've been to Colorado Harvest Company. Why Colorado Harvest Company? For so many reasons. We pride ourselves on carrying only the most consistent flowers and products, with knowledgeable and friendly bud tenders that'll assist you with everything that you need. Buds, vaporizers, concentrates, topicals, edibles, and drinks, all from only the best companies in the state. If you're looking for the best cannabis experience in Denver, look no further than Colorado Harvest Company. So what is ExtractCraft? It's an appliance you can easily use at home to create concentrates and medicines. You can even cook with it. The source was designed with the home user in mind. Now you can safely extract cannabis oil and make your own concentrate at home without blowing up your house. The source is the world's first at-home essential extraction and concentrate appliance. You can order yours at extractcraft.com/store. Use coupon code WorldViralTV to receive free shipping at checkout.
Hey, yo, what up, world? This is Big.
We are here for FRANKTALK. Blessed to have that here. Streaming live on WorldViral.tv. I'm Chad Drew. Hashtag Bud Tender the Stars. Excited to have my friend Frank Conrad, scientist Frank, ready to teach us. I think he's going to do something called a terpene. I know I've smoked them before. I don't know exactly what it is, but I'm excited to learn. So I'm supposed to tell you to not wiggle your shirt too much. Feedback. Wah, 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 wah. I'll have to go turn that down. But without further ado, we appreciate you guys being here. Make sure you get your drinks and whatnot. Here's my boy Frank.
Damn it, there's supposed to be a little square that I'm not allowed to leave. Cindy's going to invest in a bark collar that, I can pass on. So if I leave this little area, if I'm unnaturally constrained to it, it's because of the camera or something. Anyway, this is FRANKTALK. I'm Frank. Trying to reduce that feedback. Is that all right? It's good. Okay, so this is the second time we've been at Herman's Hideaway. We really appreciate it because, as you can see, there's a lot more people here. I mean, really, Herman's, thank you very much. Everyone give a round of applause for Herman's Hideaway and for World Viral. So Chad and Chris are both World Viral TV. It's a podcast, and they're helping us with a lot of the AV. They're our new partners, and trust me, by myself, I can barely find my shoes. Managing a TV and recording, no, not as much. So round of applause for World Viral too. Okay, what are terpenes for? They're for fighting! Everyone's like, what? Promise you that this will make sense. So, I made this up about a week ago and it's no longer really relevant, so I'm just gonna skip right past this. Touch on it briefly. I'm guilty always of trying to stuff too many things into a talk, usually, and then you guys would patiently sit here for an hour and a half, but the talk's only 45 minutes. So, I cut out a lot of the things about terpenes and manufacturing, but I think Todd Dabb from Colorado Springs, raise your hand. Tony Dabb, I only got that part. We drove all the way here from Colorado Springs, which I really appreciate. When we talk about industrial production of terpenes, come see me afterwards and we'll probably have it as another talk, because it was a whole separate talk and we could sit here and talk all day. And maybe someday we'll have like a 2-day conference where we smoke dabs and talk about terpenes. And Carolyn also asked me about that from Jet. So she's from Jet Labs and they do extractions of those things. The most important thing, which I'm just not going to talk about today, but all of you keep this in mind, your extraction can be super great, awesome, great, fresh. Focus on your packaging, because oxidation of your terpenes will make them taste bad. So if you can get them, you know, like Dunkin' Donuts, fresh to the store, and that's good, but they may sit there a while and your customers will get unhappy. So everyone nod if you're kind of, oxygen is generally not so great for your terpenes taste. And I apologize for not covering that, but at some point in Frank Talk we will. I went into insane detail on it. Somebody's like, you just did cover that. I was like, looking through oxygen scavengers and things, and Cindy's like, this talk's gonna be 2 hours. Okay, raise your hand if this is your first time in Frank Talk. Okay, rest of you, what's the first rule of Frank Talk? This is your first night. You have to fight. The rest of you, I always do when they look, they're like, what? You don't have to fight, it's all right. No fighting. This is your first time at Frank Talk. When I ask questions, or I really do want your input. The point of this whole presentation and even this whole industry is that, that'll come up in my next slide. I just realized when I put that. The whole point about this industry is that it's new. It is new and it's not new, but there are a lot of things that have been left unlearned and untapped because it's been hidden for so long. So I ask a question, you can respond, or you can raise your hand at any point, because I'm really curious at that moment what you're thinking about the slide and what your thoughts are. So, second and third talks. Be civil, no doing that, bad squirrel. One squirrel to a fight, you know. I really thought this would be funnier, but okay. My point is, in kindergarten we all raised our hands before shouting out stuff, and all really excited and whatever, but I am horrible at keeping time. Keep in line, talk to each other, that kind of thing. We have this civil, discussion period like afterwards. A lot of it, you will get your chance to say whatever you want to say, but definitely raise your hand, and if other people are raising their hands, just wait till I call on you. I promise I will call on you, but don't be running around waving your lightsaber all over the place, hitting other squirrels. That's over. Okay. Backing that shit up. I am not frequently wrong, but I'm wrong, or I may not know as much, or there may be something that is, from your perspective, one way, this perspective another way. There are many things in the cannabis industry and in science in general. This is the most annoying science answer ever, but it depends. So if you have something to say, or if you have perspective on something, that is great. If it's baseless, you will now have announced it in front of everyone, and if I know it's baseless, I will let everyone know that, so back that shit up. And on my part, I will always try to back it up. I spend a lot of times researching these. Where I don't know the exact answer, I at least try to find support for and explore other alternatives. Nobody's universally right, nobody's universally wrong. Now there are some people who are totally wrong all the time, never mind. Back it up if you can. Even logically, like it follows like this. There's one part of the talk today which actually intuitively doesn't make sense. It's the opposite of an answer, but I'll get to it. It's actually about why fire strains in cannabis are susceptible to powdery mildew. Raise your hand if you've heard of fire strains. Okay, over 20% THC strains. A little closer. Anyone smoked one? Okay. Did you know they're susceptible to powdery mildew? Always like, yeah, they're susceptible. There's a reason for it. It makes sense. Oh, this is Marinol. This is pure THC. How exciting, right? Marinol is the pharmaceutical drug. It's pure THC. It is not as effective as cannabis flower or extracts for the reason that, and it's also not as exciting, all the flavor, all of the color, everything comes from terpenes. Who's a fan of beer here? Close related cousin of cannabis. It's awesome. No one's ever, I'm still one day want to try breathing through things. Every plant that you can think of that's citrusy, smells like pine, smells like lemon, other things, it's not actually a coincidence that they name certain strains of marijuana after these. Pine trees have high levels of pinene. Pinene is expressed in cannabis. Citrus, high levels of limonene. It's expressed in cannabis. Myrcene, which is kind of a light florally scent, it's expressed all across the flower world, it's expressed in cannabis. So the fact that they're naming these things saying it's citrus-like, no, citrus is. It's not like, it is the exact same compound. So the combination of things that you get, and this is a big complicated color wheel, and it's the last you're gonna see of it tonight. You guys are like, uh-oh. Yay. If you wanna know more about different strains, you can look up, just Google terpenes color wheel, and it will show you like, you get this combination, you get this combination, or just look up the name of the strain. That's not what this talk is gonna be about, because, surprisingly, plants did not evolve to be delicious precisely for you to eat them. That wasn't the main purpose of terpenes. You guys are like, selfish? Okay. Terpenes are for fighting.
You know, I don't like that image.
What, this image? So this is powdery mildew, which is fungus. This is a spider mite, and this is a cannabis plant running away. Has anyone seen this behavior in cannabis? You smoked too much of your cannabis. Cannabis doesn't get up and run away. That's it. We as... No, your cannabis does not get up and literally run away. Fight or flight response. Raise your hand if you're familiar with that. Okay, fight or flight response is that if presented with a threat of some kind, we can have a choice basically of fighting or running away, right? Plants literally cannot do that. They cannot run away. They have to fight. Or they have to defend. So I put up this thing because I was like, oh, I'm going to do this, this, and this, and I realized I was like, no, it is just as simple as this. Terpenes are one of the best things in plants. Why am I feedbacking like that?
You walked out of your office.
Ah. Is that right? Oh, damn, I am off to the spots. Powdery mildew and insects, this is just a mite, but there's very many examples of them. This is actually beta-caryophyllene, this is limonene, and this is myrcene. Terpenes most often are a shield, but the plant evolved almost as soon as they got onto land, because that's how old terpenes are, and that's why all these other plants express them. They evolved them because they can't run away. They gotta have something, because things are gonna eat them. That's just the nature of the jungle, and if they didn't have a very good defense mechanism, in some cases even offensive mechanism, it wouldn't last very long. This just represents hydrogen peroxide, which I'm gonna get into in a little bit. Who's used hydrogen peroxide in their cannabis cultivation? Okay. Who's hydrogen dioxide? Are you sure? Monooxygen no, go on now. Hydrogen peroxide is, it's also that stuff that you use to wash out your wounds, right?
No, don't do that.
Diana's a nurse. She's like, no, don't you wash out your wounds with hydrogen peroxide. I'm always like, hydrogen peroxide is a lethal weapon. You pour it on most microbes, they die. You pour it on a bunch of your cells too, a lot of them will die too. Hydrogen peroxide is a weapon. This is very important when we're going to talk about fire strains later on. So your plants evolved shields, chemical weapons in the form of terpenes, and also in some cases offensive weapons, and they also have an ancient tool and the ability to produce hydrogen peroxide at will to simply dump on fungus and kill them. Okay, so where these things are. This is I drew this. I was like, all right, I'm gonna draw a bud, because there's pictures all over the place, but this is a cannabis sativa bud, and this is some microscopy we took in our lab. These are little trichomes that are little outcroppings of the plant with a giant bulb. Terpenes and cannabinoids are produced in the same gland. And they're basically produced external to the cell because they want it there on the outside. They don't want to have it inside the house, because by the time the dude gets in there and they broke in, I was going to make some joke about Colorado's make my day laws, but no, okay. They have them on the outside because they're the most effective there, and we're getting aromas from terpenes, volatiles, all those kind of things. Part of that is because they're actively trying to repel insects and fungus and whatever kind of enemies all the time. And they can be induced, if you've ever had a mite attack or any kind of injury to your plant, they will actually produce even more terpenes in response to that attack because they're actively trying to defend themselves. You also get little hairs along the leaves. You get different types of glands here as well. They're not as obvious as the trichomes up on the bud, but you do get these all up and down the stem, all up and down the stalk, and these have little, less obvious glands that still produce quite a amount of terpenes. So terpenes are a model of efficiency. The reason you have so many diverse strains, I know everyone's mind instantly went blank when I put up chemical structures. They were like, oh. Terpenes are all basically made from the same molecule. So you've got something called geranyl pyrophosphate here. Bonus question, which I actually don't have any candy, so you don't get a bonus, but who knows what else, what geranyl phosphate is also used to make? What's that? It is, but I was thinking a plant product. Cannabinoids. At the intersection of geranyl pyrophosphate, you make terpenes, you make monoterpenes, you make diterpenes, you make sequiterpenes, and you also make cannabigerolic acid. They all intersect at GPP. This is actually pretty important later on when I was talking about like fire strains. But the importance of GPP is that from one molecule, from just one, think about if you could make an endless amount of things from like the same brick, and they are completely different from each other. Myrcene, which is right there, is a linear terpene that kind of gives a floral scent. It volatilizes off. It's one of like the flowery scents that you're getting from like most cannabis molecules. It also attracts insects, by the way. Terpenine, linalool and actually myrcene are fairly related. All of these different combinations of terpene, depending on the enzyme that you have from your strain, it will make different combinations completely random or completely specific to that strain, depending on the enzyme. So you actually cross different plants. Is everyone aware that you have like myrcene dominant versus like say humulene dominant or, yeah, everyone nod if you're with me? Okay. You get different dominance and terpene profiles based at this one enzyme. You get one amino acid change or one mutation, you can change your entire downstream profile completely. It's pretty incredible because they developed this enzyme to deliberately not make 100% of one thing, because the more weapons you have, the more diverse enemies you can fight. So if like a fungus evolves resistance to one thing, you can produce more of the other thing. So it makes certain that the plants have an arsenal that they can fight off a very large number of enemies because they can't run away.
Just a question: is that similar, like with human, like with the human genes, and how you can have red hair, like the same way kind of goes down like that?
Good question. What's your name?
Josh.
Josh is our first fighter. Josh was asking if this was similar with human enzyme in that if you give them one thing, will they produce a variety of different products? I'm not equipped to answer that. It depends on I'll say it depends on the enzyme. Remember I said it's the most annoying science answer ever? It depends on the enzyme and it depends on what the need is. So I'll use one example from humans. We all have an immune system that can fight off almost an infinite number of things. Does anyone know anything about the immune system and where I'm going with this? Yeah. Your immune cells are some of the few cells in your body that at a specific point in their genome they randomly rearrange so they can make an infinite, well, not infinite, a huge diversity of antibodies that are potentially specific to a huge number of things. So that's one case where it happens. It's not enzymatic, but, well, precisely. There are cases in evolution where this has happened a lot, where you need to be economical. You got a limited amount in your genome, you got to make it count. You can't just carry around extra copies like, I'm going to use this to make limonene, I'm going to use this to make myrcene. They do actually, plants have a lot of synthases for terpenes, but this is a way to kind of conserve your energy and still get the maximum punch out of it. I think that answered your question. Same thing with our immune system. Okay, so what terpenes are supposed to do when they're working correctly? So I mentioned that plants evolved this a very long time ago. I used to work in the 90s. I was like, that's 20 years ago now. Okay. 20 years ago or so, I used to work on insect-plant interactions where there's a hypothesis, and it still holds up pretty good, is that insects and fungi and plants are engaged in an endless evolutionary ancestral battle. One of them develops a weapon to kill the other one. The ones that survive, they develop a defense against it. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Same thing with antibiotic resistance. You treat enough bacteria with something, the ones that end up living, right, are going to be immune to it. So, certain types of fungus, certain types of insects, after the plants have killed off their neighbors, their brothers, and everything else, and you got one or two of them left, develop resistance or tolerance or other things to these. And so plants are endlessly trying to use that enzyme, like let's make more, let's make different things, let's hit them with a bunch of different things to try and make certain that they don't eat us alive. So the way terpenes are supposed to work in plants is that you produce a bunch of these chemicals in like constantly. Like marijuana doesn't just wait until it's attacked to become aromatic, right? Lexi got so excited she spilled her beer. Oh! Constantly releasing low levels of them, but certain things like myrcene, actually many of the different types of compounds. I was going to go into the list of the 200 plus of them, and that'd be dumb. Many compounds are constantly released, and in response to attack, anyone here a grower who uses those ozone blasters? You ever notice anything like happens to those? Ozone actually is one of the things that triggers terpene production, because the plant thinks that it's actually being exposed to like toxic chemicals or something. It's okay. Anyway, what should happen is that even if you don't have a bud, but you've still got leaves, you've got, say you get attacked with a little bit of fungus, and this is blowing it up right here. I'm gonna turn my back to the other audience now. Fungus attacks on a leaf, most of the time you will never even see it. You might see a dot, something like that, because a lot of strains and hops, and they know that this is actually the principal component of why hops plants are resistant to fungus, and why some of them are actually, high myrcene strains are actually susceptible, is that beta-caryophyllene is produced in low levels, and in response to this fungus touching the plant, it stops pumping that terpene into that area. The reason for this is that beta-caryophyllene, in addition to just really annoying the fungus and other insects, is that upon ingestion, it's toxic to the fungus, to powdery mildew that haven't developed resistance to it. Now, the plant doesn't just start there, and this is something that is fairly not well known, I think, by people outside my field, is that if the plant continues to fight this, so say you got a fungus that's developed resistance to beta-caryophyllene, the plant, in addition to secreting the terpenes, will also produce hydrogen peroxide at will and drop it at the site of the fungal infection. Now, you all know hydrogen peroxide is antimicrobial, right? It is incredibly dangerous for the plant to do this, but it is also, bringing a thermonuclear weapon to a knife fight. Any of you seen powdery mildew crawl over a plant that doesn't have this defense? I'm going to show you a picture later. It's not even the saddest one, but they don't have this. Oops. Similarly, your trichomes, because they're very efficient chemical weapons factories, you get something chewing all over your plant like this, they're like, ah, crap, let's start pumping chemicals into that thing because now we're recognizing that it's an insect. Depending on the type of insect, this is a dead spider mite with little crosses on his eyes. I don't know. Limonene is an excellent repellent of most insects. They find it super annoying. Citrus trees, you may get infections with bacteria, you may even get infections with certain types of fungus, like penicillin is a type of fungus that really likes attacking oranges, the penicillin producing bacteria, or fungi. Limonene, botrytis? Yeah, botrytis is an annoying one. That's like a whole topic for another time. Anyway, limonene and other types of cyclic terpenes that are highly aromatic, bugs really don't like them. Citronella, those candles in the backyard, they're all based off of citronella, which comes from a plant that's name I can't remember right now. This geranium. Thanks, Holly. Always like citronella comes from geranium. It does. Okay, so this is when it does work and you've got an attacker that is susceptible to your weapons. Okay. Why do I have this slide up here? This is an American Bulldog 100 years ago. This is the current breed. Good things. Selective breeding leads to exaggerated traits of some kind, and it almost always leaves a deficit somewhere else. Almost always. In fact, I can't think of an example where it doesn't do that. Sometimes the genome can compensate for it, but in this case, bulldogs went from having like a normal sized jaw to having an underbite. This would be a problem if they lived in the wild. Anyone here know that bulldogs can't actually give live birth? Charlie's like, why can't they give live birth, Charlie? Your turn to fight.
The orifice on the back end is too small for the...
Charlie's like, the orifice on the back end is too small. Ian?
Their heads are larger than the opening in the female bulldog's pelvis.
Ian's saying the head is larger than the opening in the female bulldog's pelvis. Both correct. Charlie used orifice and backhand. No one's expected to be a bulldog. You both knew this though, which is kind of the key point. The reason that bulldogs cannot give live births for the most part is that breeding for like a really large head, their head is literally too large to fit through the mother's birth canal. And they get trapped at the pelvis. Mother dies, bulldog dies. Could this exist in nature? No. That's exactly the opposite of a positive trait if it kills you when you're producing offspring. So how these things happen to exist is that humans are very good at helping our animal and plant friends along. So marijuana used to be, even 20 years ago, an average of like 5% THCA. What is the average now in Colorado's market, which, screw the rest of you guys, we're better. What? A lot of good guesses, and they're all within range. The average, according to a 2015 marketing study, the average flower in Colorado is 17.5% per weight THCA. And it can go up to 28% THCA. At that point, at the 17.5% though, to going above 20%, this happens in varying degrees. Well, one other thing which I was going to mention about Colorado Green Lab earlier is that we started off as a testing lab, and we've now ended up as an applied science lab. Many things I'm like, what the hell is that? I gotta figure that out. Okay, it's profitable, it's useful, and it is. There are many problems where we're like, because you produce 28% THCA, that plant theoretically is almost as easy to raise as an 18% plant, but now you've got 30% more THCA. Collie's like, move this way more. Seriously. Okay, so when things go wrong, and I will show you a pretty vivid example of this. I don't have any examples of when I'll get there in a second. It's so hard to manage myself. How am I doing on time? Yeah. Cindy's like, you're never gonna be able to do this in 45 minutes. Not ever. And I wore a watch this time. When terpenes, for a variety of reasons, are not, the profile is not well suited to the thing attacking them, things don't go as they should, which means like you get an infection instead of fighting one off. So in the case of terpenes that we've found so far, and strains that we've looked at so far, when I'm talking about backing that shit up, I'm going to caveat here because there's a lot of strains out there. What we tend to find a trend here is that myrcene dominant strains, and myrcene are linear isoprenoid terpenes, so they look like this and the ring is not closed. They seem to be susceptible to powdery mildew. And I'm not even sure that it's the myrcene's fault. In fact, myrcene tends to be something that's more associated with attraction of insects, but it seems that, and this actually follows in hops as well, is that high levels of myrcene, for whatever reason, track with susceptibility to powdery mildew. The other thing that tracks is THCA over 20%. So now you got no shield, now you got no sword, what are you gonna do? You can't run away. You should definitely spray 100 times as much fungicide on it though. No. We'll talk about that part later. So this thing attacks, the plant responds by blasting it with myrcene. Beta-caryophyllene is a good antifungal, myrcene's not. So the fungus is like, that's cool, I'll just kind of hang out in here and I'll just dig around. Powdery mildew in particular is what's called a biotroph. It doesn't want to kill the plant, not readily anyway. It wants to drain the life out of it, and it's what's called an obligate biotroph. It needs the plant to be alive. So you have this thing, it spreads some more, and this is the insidious thing about powdery mildew and why it is so important to have preventative treatments for powdery mildew. By the time you see that you have powdery mildew and it's actually on the plant leaf, it's too late. Your facility's probably contaminated. That plant is definitely infected because this is when you see it. It's crawled, it's crept under the surface, and now it's burst out. I don't know if you can see these. I got a little carried away with like the white powdery snow globe kind of thing, walking in a winter wonderland. Because multiple of your plants probably got infected all at the same time, when they release their spores, all of a sudden you come into your room and you're like, fuck. Yesterday it was fine. It was fine yesterday because all those plants 10 days before probably all got infected, and you've got X amount of susceptible strains. Incubation temperature for those strains was probably pretty close for those things, so they all burst out at the surface all at the same time. Now you gotta clean up your facility. And they've now probably infected another thing. So you get to wait another 10 to 15 days and you're gonna get another snow globe. So if you have this problem and you want more help with us, or more help from us, let us know, because we have some good ways of dealing with this as Colorado Green Lab. So what should have happened in this case, which I kind of skipped past before, the other thing that hydrogen peroxide does is that if it can't contain the infection, and this is pretty medieval, but this defense evolved, millions of years ago, is that if hydrogen peroxide can't kill the fungus at the site of the infection, and it can't contain it, notice how sometimes your plants will randomly, their leaf will turn brown and just fall off and you have no idea why? That's because something was attacking that leaf and the plant just said, okay, sorry about this, buddy. It's actually called hypersensitivity reaction. It's not an emo thing. The plant recognizes, like, I can chop off this leaf, which is really useful for photosynthesis, or I can let the fungus crawl into the rest of the body, or I can just tell the leaf the hydrogen peroxide will literally tell that leaf to kill itself. It'll be like, yeah, kill yourself, bro. Yeah, what did you call it? Holly called it senescence. It's cell suicide. It's not technically senescence. They're different. What's wrong? Fight! We can fight about it later. And I'm just, technical term. Senescence. Anyway, that doesn't happen. So in, I'll use that strain because I think it's actually in the next slide. In some types of fire strains that we've observed, the one in particular that I gruesomely infected with powdery mildew that put up no fight whatsoever was Flow F3. Who's familiar with that strain? Literally, and I put it next to grapefruit sour diesel, I rubbed mold all over that thing. Damien was like, God, what are you doing to my babies? And all that did, the grapefruit by sour diesel, in the cases where I gave it a really strong dose of infection, I'm literally like, this is never gonna happen. I was like rubbing leaves on it, that kind of thing. The most that happened is that on its fan leaves, it caused them to rot up, die, and drop off. Could not be infected with it. Now there are a lot of environmental factors like moisture. Sorry, what, Holly? Some plants can get infected if you leave them vulnerable, like they're too crowded, you don't get enough airflow, you get some moisture, you get the right temperature range. But if you give some plants that are generally resistant to powdery mildew enough room, you don't have to do anything to them. They will be fine all by themselves. Whereas some of them, like Flow F3, they will never be fine all by themselves. You could watch them all day long. You have to give them actually a lot of extra help. Nod your head if everyone's kind of like been seeing this phenomenon. Okay. Okay, mismatched tactics and enemies. If, for example, you're producing a bunch of things like pinene and you're repelling a bunch of insects successfully, great, you've got this great profile, it's smelling really great on this end. It could just be that you're producing all this and it's fantastic. You're not producing the ones that allow you to defend against fungus. We're still trying to figure out exactly why some strains get aphids and some get mites and some don't. It turns out that myrcene is actually a very weird molecule. At high levels of myrcene, low levels of myrcene, this will sound counterintuitive, bugs are repelled. At high levels, some bugs, including the russet mite, have learned to recognize it as a place to party. Guys are like, what? They recognize, because myrcene's a stress molecule, they're like, I know there's a diseased, weakened plant around here and I want to make babies on it. No kidding. They have evolved that characteristic. They're like, oh yeah, it's somewhere around here. I'm going to find a wife. I'm going to raise all my babies on this plant. Low levels, they associate that with a strong plant. So you have plants that are actually healthy, but they're pumping out a huge amount of myrcene. I was gonna have a sex scene with some mites and I didn't have time to draw it and it seemed inappropriate. Who's familiar with the Colorado pine bark beetle? Okay, another example of mismatched tactics. This is an invasive species. Pine is incredibly resistant to bugs in general because it produces a whole bunch of pinene and other things. The bark beetle homes in on pine. It actually has a great liver. It doesn't really have a liver, but it has other things. So it's like, cool, I can eat these toxic things, nobody else can. And the pine has not been around it long enough to actually evolve a new type of chemical defense against it. In fact, it makes it worse. Has anyone seen how just rapidly, you're driving up I-70 and you look, there's giant yellow patches across the mountain. The pine beetle's like, woo, ladies, come on. And so eventually there will be resistant, I'm sure, of pine trees that can fight off the bark beetle, but it's going to be a while before we get there. So that's one example of a mismatch. Same thing with myrcene in certain strains, because certain strains, what's your name? Martin? Bart. You were nodding your head at the myrcene thing? What strains do you know that are super susceptible to mites? Because some of them are. We're still trying to like tag them and be like, figure this out. So Bart was saying that they've been noticing, like as growers, that there are certain strains that are heavily overproduced. I mean, some of it, it's just like long term, they senesce, give Holly a bone. But Bart was saying, like long term, they've shown that they are more susceptible to things like mite. We've actually put together a concept right now, which I think it's going to be really fun. We're making a mite hotel. Yeah, and I was like, this will be awesome if this works. It's on the concept, we're probably not going to be able to finish the design work on it for another 8 months, but it would be a way to actually tell the mites, here's a place to party, and you put it among your plants and you get a little mite trap. This is not as far-fetched as it sounds. They actually do this with the cotton boll weevil in the south. I think they do this with tobacco horn, no, they don't do it with the hornworms, it's the boll weevil. Everyone just kind of like, yeah, okay. You can actually set stuff in your grows when you've got a susceptible monocultivar, including cotton, and you actually you tell all the bugs this is a place to party, and they just go in there and they get shredded into a little trap. So, indicator plants? Nobody wants to grow another plant in a grow besides marijuana. Holly said indicator plants. It's a good point. Some grows, particularly in different types of farms, they use what are called sentinel plants or indicator plants. These are the plants that are basically there to take a punch, so you know that there's bugs in the field. I like my mite hotel better, because I just have this image of all the mites falling down a little funnel and into a blender. Kind of like what happens with Pokemon, like when you don't like them, you make them into candy. No? No one? Okay, Lexi's with me. If you get a bad Pokemon, you give it to the professor and they give you back candy. What happens to those Pokemon? Does anyone ask? Do they go into the Pokemon sex trade? Like, are they being sold for their exotic parts and horns onto the black market of herbal remedies? This is the stuff that keeps me awake at night. That's a total waste of time. Okay, this is the example. Can everyone see this? This is week 3 of the infection. This is sour diesel by grapefruit. No infection. This is flow F3. I used to work in the petroleum industry. I've only recently come to this industry in large part because my boss, I tell this story because I still am like, my boss used to randomly drug test me randomly every time I came back from Burning Man. So I have not actually had more than the last 2 years to kind of experience cannabis because it was kind of like, okay, here comes another drug test. So couldn't smoke any. But one of the things that I excel at is doing experiments that other people are like, what are you doing? I wanted to know why some strains, or at least form the basis of like why strains get powdery mildew and why they don't, so that we can stop it. Because using fungicides is not working. We've already cultivated in our lab several strains of fungicide-resistant powdery mildew. People keep putting on more and more and more, and just like with antibiotics, it's not working anymore. We gotta come up with a different way. But in order to do that, you gotta understand why these strains get infected in the first place, because it's not a natural thing for an organism to be this susceptible to infection. Like the bulldog. These types of strains of cannabis, and actually just going back to hops, because it's a pretty good model, in 1998, the hops crop and industry in the United States was threatened with oblivion, because a type of thing called blue mold had moved into Washington and Oregon for the first time in 100 years, and it nearly wiped out all the hops cultivars because none of them were resistant to it. So they ended up finding a bunch that were, they crossed them back into it, and you know what they found? Some of the strains were still susceptible to it. And it turns out that the ones that were high levels of myrcene in hops, even if they cross into a resistant strain, they still get powdery mildew. So it's not just myrcene, it's something else. They actually have a deficit in hydrogen peroxide production. So they got no shield, they got no sword. So, grapefruit sour diesel has got a whole panel of different types of terpenes, including different things like limonene. Limonene by itself is not necessarily that effective as an antimicrobe, or we're still testing it. It does still produce beta-caryophyllene, which is super effective as an antifungal. FLOF3, I actually can't remember what it has offhand, but I think myrcene. FLOF3 has not only has no shield, but it literally has no defenses. So I let this thing grow without treating with any antifungals to see if the plant would do something. When I rubbed stuff on the sour diesel like grapefruit, it would just drop its leaves. The FLOF3 just let the fungus crawl over the entire plant until it died. It didn't do a damn thing. And 40 minutes with 5 minutes left for a question. I cut a lot of the stuff out, but I kind of also wanted to leave this open for discussion. Questions, and I'll come around to you with the mic. Lexi.
So, if H2O2 is a response to the systemic auto response system in the plants, if we continually expose them to H2O2, is this similar to giving someone like a continual inoculant? As in, if we keep dousing the plant in H2O2, is this really just overs?
So Lexi was asking, like, if we continuously expose the plant to hydrogen peroxide, more or less what will happen? Hydrogen peroxide is not good for the plant. It's not good for anybody. Like, our cells, random trivia, because I was talking about the immune system, because I used to work in an immune system lab. Even our cells in our immune system can produce small amounts of hydrogen peroxide, but it's literally like keeping around an unstable nuclear weapon, but you keep it around and the ability to make it just in case you need it. So, not exactly. Remember your other question? One squirrel at a time? One squirrel? The answer is, Lexi, is that hydrogen peroxide, in addition to killing the fungus, is also a signal for the cell, for the plant, to set in place a whole series of downstream pathways, most of which include killing itself. We made this tactical error early on with the grower, where we suggested they use, happened last time, that guy has got the loudest scooter at exactly this time. He's gonna come back, 5 minutes. We made the mistake early on one time of suggesting very discrete applications of salicylic acid, which is aspirin. Everyone can salicylic acid you can use in very light doses, and it'll tell the plant to kind of harden up, set in play your defense mechanisms. Silica is a great one. One squirrel at a time. I will get to silica is a good point though, so let's get back to that. But salicylic acid, one of the things it does is tell the plant to kill itself and chop that leaf off. So the grower that we gave this to was like, well, applying this once a week, one at a time, spraying it gently on the leaves, I don't agree with Frank on that. I'm gonna put it in the hydroponic system. Okay. Yeah, the whole room was dead overnight. The person was pissed. It was a lot of money. I got yelled at, even though it wasn't my fault. In fact, I explicitly said, don't do stuff like this. We never recommend it again because if somebody forgets to sell somebody, too late. Surprise. So, same thing with hydrogen peroxide. If you overuse hydrogen peroxide, one of the things, it will definitely alter the metabolism of the cell, and it may potentially harm your cannabinoid production, terpene production, health of the plant, a lot of different downstream things. What's your name? Dorian. You're talking about silica related to fungus?
You were just bringing up silica in a plant and salicylic acid, which is readily available in some forms and products as OSO28 or facilitator, and it doesn't take long for the plant to absorb it, as opposed to a silica from Botanicare or GH or whatnot. And that's just it.
Dorian, good fight. This is your first Frank Talk? First Frank Talk? Second Frank Talk? First ever. Dorian mentioned, so there's salicylic acid is different than silicic acid or silica. So one of the, OSA28 is a product you give your plants. There are many things where, seriously, I'm not always right, but I am always skeptical. And when somebody's like, we're gonna do this, and I was like, this is bunk. There's a lot of bad growth products out there. However, OSA 28. Silica is, oh, go ahead. OSA silicic acid is a type of bioavailable silica. And once I did some research on it, because a friend of mine, uses it on all his plants, and he's like, this works. It turns out that plants in some soils typically have a deficit of silica. One of the things they think that silica does, so silica is just like essentially glass or sand. So, but you've got ions that the plant can incorporate into their system. One of the things they think it does to actually do with cannabis plants is that it actually prevents the fungus from penetrating into the leaf surface. I haven't seen a full trial of it. I've seen enough to at least be like, yeah, it's plausible that this does this. So, thank you. Yeah, it strengthens cell walls and a bunch of, so when that fungus is punching in and crawling around on other things, that could be potentially one mechanism, and it's actually a physical mechanism to actually help the plant harden up, especially for one that's genetically susceptible like FlowF3. So, good point, thank you.
What about using aloe powder?
What's your name?
Kevin.
Kevin, what about using aloe powder?
Aloe, from my understanding, aloe has a high concentration of salicylic acid because autoimmune booster.
So aloe like the aloe plant.
Aloe like aloe plant.
Your name's Alan.
My name is
Kevin. So Kevin was saying about using aloe powder from like the aloe plant because it's got salicylic acid and other things. I have no idea. I know that a bunch of those things do work. Lexi was asking me about knotweed. There's like an extract of a plant called knotweed. It tells the plant to trigger its antifungal response. I will say the caveat with some of these things, which if you go back and watch our triage talk, it actually becomes a lot more affordable. The caveat with some of the essential oils, including aloe and other things, is that they become very expensive and hard to apply over a wide area, which is why people by default go to fungicides. Yeah, we're going to have to revisit the fungicide and plant triage system talk we did a couple of months ago, where we just actually have you separate your plants into the special needs kids and put them in a corner. You literally give them 5 times as much attention, and the other ones you ignore because they won't get fungus. You don't even need to give them aloe. But yeah, aloe, I'm not familiar with it exactly, but a lot of the essential oils like that I would suspect would help the plant. What it doesn't help, which is why some of the application of these things is totally useless, is that it doesn't change the fact that plants like FlowF3 don't produce hydrogen peroxide. They just don't. So you can defend for a while, but in the end, I mean, some of the things that are more preventative antifungals and have direct antifungal action can be judiciously added. You can't harden up a plant that doesn't have an immune system. It may be missing 1, 2, 3 other components, so what you have to do is prevent it from getting infected in the first place. Yes? Oh, what's your name? I'm gonna bring this to you. This is my first time walking around with the microphone. I feel weird about it, so help me out. Name and question.
My name's Craig. My question is it in the grapefruit sour diesel, is that the hydrogen peroxide response that's allowing it to drop its leaves, or is it the beta carotene?
Craig? Craig was asking, in the grapefruit sour diesel, is it the hydrogen peroxide or the beta carotene?
Additionally, would you consider that plant still viable? Could you take it to harvest, that grapefruit sour diesel?
Oh yeah. The part with the leaf rotting and falling off is a characteristic response, at least partly, of the hydrogen peroxide. It says it's like knocking a boulder to roll downhill. Did everyone hear Craig's question though? Okay, was it a hydrogen peroxide response? The part where the plant turns brown, rolls up, that kind of thing, that is conserved way, 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 way back. It's at least part of it. So the answer is yes. We've been working on a staining protocol for some time where you can actually, among the other things, we're like, think about the NDAs in my head. Everyone in this industry is like, NDA, NDA. I can't tell you my mom's name, NDA. It's secret, it's mine. I'm like, yeah, okay. One of the things we've been working on for the last 6 months, and it related back directly to that, is a rapid staining kit to show if the plant has an attacked response or not, all the way down to the seedling stage. So you don't have to wait until it gets fungus. If you made a new cross and you actually want to see if it works or not, you can stain it when it's still basically just a clone. I think I answered your question, I overtalked. Yes, it is almost certainly involved in the hydrogen peroxide response, and the lack of that response, like its leaves don't fall, rot off, that kind of thing, indicates a deficit in the hydrogen peroxide response, at least part of it, in the FlowF3. Because that's conserved across many, many, many plant species. Basil, for example, has this problem a lot. You know why basil's so delicious?
Why is it so delicious?
Exaggerate inbreeding, basically. Basil, the leaf, the part that gets infected with mildew. We made it produce all these terpenes. They're not antifungal terpenes. We like them, yay! Question about Charlie.
So there's grower lighting technology out there that's starting to claim antifungal growth properties in the plant. What is your opinion about that?
We get a chance to fire a client on that project like that. Charlie was asking, everyone here's question? There's grow lighting out there that now claims to be like antifungal, antimicrobial, do a bunch of other things. Going back to the whole backing thing stuff, and also probably in the next step, be skeptical of everything. It depends.
Are there different specimens that can encourage more antifungal properties?
Yeah, I'm thinking of NDAs right now. Like, what can I say? There are many different types of technologies, and the wavelength, it's not ultraviolet light definitely kills certain types of fungus. I'm not going to click back to this because I love doing that. Remember what I showed you with the powdery mildew and it actually creeping into the inside of the cell? I'm getting to your question. This is not that well known, but people like to use systemics. Eagle 20 is one of my not favorites.
Cultural practices.
Eagle 20 is not a bad fungicide, and part of the reason why people like to use it, and part of the reason why it is so effective, and I promise I'm getting to the ultraviolet lights and other things, is that it is systemic. Powdery mildew, when you see it growing on the surface, you're probably missing a whole bunch. So one of the talks that we gave 4 months ago was that I showed staining of a leaf that was heavily infected with powdery mildew. It had only moderate fuzz and like white powder on the leaf. And because I did staining and looked through the entire leaf, the entire inside of the leaf was crawling with it. Plants, living plants, and this is probably part of the reason why powdery mildew does this, are naturally good at absorbing ultraviolet. They're naturally good at absorbing a whole bunch of wavelengths of light, right? That's how they live. That's why powdery mildew hangs out in there. As a side benefit, probably catches a lot of those rays. So if you're doing something that's deep enough to actually penetrate the plant leaf by wavelength, you might be screwing up that plant in some ways too. So that's it depends, but that has been my perspective on things like that. It's not to say they're not going to do a lot of good, particularly if you're irradiating surfaces, but the issue is that with even a well-maintained canopy, you're never going to get full penetration of one of those units without scorching through your plants. Because if it can penetrate from the ceiling all the way to the floor, what does that mean for your leaves? They're like, you're burning, man, you're burning. So I think that answered your question. Yes?
Another question. So the, kind of back up with your question.
I was gonna wade in there, and then I was like, this thing is too. I'll repeat your question.
Is it the beta caryophylline?
Mm-hmm.
That article. So that, just to get this right, that actually is the best defense, right? You said
Until it's not.
Until it's not. Now, is that capable of being like produced or at least be infused into the roots to make almost like a steroid to the plant?
Remember when I said that some things, if you have too much of them, it's not a good thing? One of the papers I was reviewing, it's part of this, and that it's an ongoing thing, is, and I posted one of these to Facebook the other day because I was like, that is an interesting perspective. Someone pointed out, they're like, if we overuse natural biocides, are they going to, the logical thought is they're going to create resistance just like the other things, because the whole point about the ancestral war, wait, did I actually repeat your question? No. Damn it, I'm getting used to that. What was your name?
Josh.
Josh was asking, can you infuse plants with beta-caryophyllene and give them that defense just by infusing it through the roots? The answer is, I don't know. You can spray it, and that probably has a good antifungal effect. Beta-caryophyllene, I have no idea what the right, caryophyllene, potato, patata, etc. I'm gonna again say like it depends. What is probably more crucial than anything else for your plants, and it just makes sense, is that you can use two things that are synergistic at once, so the thing can't develop resistance. So like nothing is gonna last forever. Hydrogen peroxide is one of the few examples, but again, if you overuse it, you're gonna strip the plant. So you can use things like very careful, that thing. There are commercial products that actually use geranium oil, which is very effective as an antifungal, and it's relatively affordable. But I would say the key thing, if you want to take anything away from this, is that use two things at once in case that thing is resistant on some level, and rotate that stuff. Because if you're constantly evolving, treating with the same thing, you will develop a resistant strain of whatever to that thing. Powdery mildew is now resistant to a lot of different types of fungicides. If we all switch over to using the same natural biocide, it's going to develop resistance to that biocide. I hope that answered your question. That was lengthy. Wait, everyone raise your hands. I think you have been waiting extremely patiently.
So, I was curious what you thought about the role of the plant microbiome and the soil microbiome and its immunity, and how that might affect your studies, which could be like a sterile effect of an innate immunity, and not considering the microbiome that it might have evolved with.
Jeremy, excellent question. Jeremy was asking about the effect of like the plant's microbiome. So it's like the number of bacteria or other types of like symbiotic organisms that are on there, and whether or not that affects the outcome. The answer is yes, and I don't know in what way yet. There are different types of things that you can apply to the plant. You can apply symbiotic organisms, and there's one that I really want to get my hands on, but I don't want to be like, oh, scientist destroys world kind of moment. It's like, oh God, what have we done? There's a type of fungus that specifically preys on spider mites. That seems to be the only thing it feeds on, and it does a really creepy thing. Cindy hates this story. You ever seen those fungi that they basically infect ants, and they make the ants go to the top of the grass so the cow eats them, so they can, that whole thing, like they actually control the behavior of the organism. This particular type of fungus gets in type, I forget if it's spider or russet mites, gets inside them, turns them into a mummy, and then it releases a pheromone that only attracts dudes. So the male mites go over, they're like, hey, I'm gonna try and mate with this mummy. The answer is that there are probably many different types of things, including the microbiome, that are highly dependent, and they have a whole bunch of roles. We try to come up with industrial applications that work across the board that don't cost that much money. That, I don't know how to say this diplomatically. Remembering the salicylic acid incident, that can't be misapplied. Like you can have perfect methods, those kind of things. I know I'm stretching, I'm going way beyond your original question. There are definitely ways you can protect the organism by giving it protective organisms, but you can't do that with all your strains, because just like all of them are differently susceptible or different profiles, it's probable that some bacteria and organisms work on some strains and they don't work on other ones. Because some of those things, Bart was mentioning, we notice some strains are more susceptible to this, some to this. Those microbiomes also depend on your terpene profile.
So do you think that there's certain beneficial microbes that would be pathogenic to others, or do you think if you toss a large repertoire of immune supporting microbes that across all the strains that it could work as effectively?
So do I think, just to rephrase it, do I think that there are some that are potentially pathogenic?
Well, you said it won't work on some, but it'll work on others. So is it pathogenic to some and not others, or is it that you don't toss a large enough repertoire of immune positive symbionts across all strains that would, you'll get some here, you'll get some here, you'll get some here.
So he's asking if no, I don't think that they're necessarily pathogenic. Sometimes in order for them to work well though, he's asking about, their capability of protecting the plant. Whether they're able and efficiently able to protect this strain versus this strain may depend on the chemicals that that plant sends out. So it may not be that they're pathogenic, they may just be a waste of money. And now you're going to get infected anyway. Now, could you theoretically apply an entire biome to the plant that'd be effective against everything? Yeah, theoretically. It would also probably be very expensive to figure out for each plant, what is the one I need for this, what do I need for this, what do I need for this? Definitely go look at our plant triage system thing. I'm just going to go back to it briefly. We had growers use the tribal knowledge that guys have been accumulating for 70 years and be like, which plants do we know suck that have this problem? Put them all in one group. Many growers grow, actually, many owners are like, I want this strain, this strain, this strain, and don't think about how that's gonna go. If you do this logically and you say like, I want these strains that produce 28% and I know they're all susceptible to mildew, we have them put them all in the corner and you got 2 guys assigned to them at all times. You pull off any families that look contaminated, you spray them with those organic and you rotate it, those organic antifungals, you can spend a certain amount of money on those things and you can actually tell these ones which we've just identified as growers, like here's your list of ones that you can ignore as long as you give them good airflow. So the microbiome thing, I think we're getting there, but right now cannabis prices are dropping because there's so much production. Coming up with a cheaper way to do it, like the microbiome thing I think is fascinating, and they're even doing this now with humans and different types of infections. Who's heard of that? It's literally a shit transplant. Some people have not the right microbiome in their intestines, and you give them a normal healthy one, and they don't get infections anymore in their intestines. I think we will eventually get there with cannabis. I'm sorry I can't answer that question more completely. It depends. But it was a very good question. Lexi?
So,
hold up. I know this is weird. We'll get 2 mics next time, so that'll be easier.
If terpenes are a function of the secondary metabolic processes, what about phenolics and nitrogen-containing compounds? Do they have the same effects as terpenes?
Next question. It depends. No, I don't know enough about that one to answer it without, but it did remind me of something I wanted to bring up this talk, which was too complicated. How many of you know that for every molecule of THCA you produce 1 molecule of hydrogen peroxide? Did any of you know that? You guys are, this guy's full of bullshit. Look it up. In the last stage when CBGA, cannabinol acid, cycles, it actually does this with CBDA as well. It does this, and like, so the paradox is like, if these plants are producing so much hydrogen peroxide, why do they have a problem producing hydrogen peroxide? Right, one squirrel, raise your hand. Carter raised his hand first. Is that correct?
No, it's a different question.
Moving on.
Change. The pathway isolates the H2O2 into its own metabolic process. It wants to use it for that specific task.
Craig? I know. Bing! Or little buds of weed. Yeah. Craig said the pathway isolates the H2O, kind of like the H2O is very dangerous. So fire strains, which are producing way more THCA than anything else, are producing hydrogen peroxide every time they produce THCA. I was like, why the hell do they have a hydrogen peroxide problem? They have a problem because they made their own problem and then they made their own solution. When you were continually pumping out, you're like throwing lit cigarettes all over the cell because you're pumping out 30% THCA, that is not a level that the cell can tolerate. So when we were trying to figure out why these cells were susceptible and producing so much THCA, I was like, but they have to produce hydrogen peroxide just fine because they're producing THCA. What we're looking for right now, and it's like digging, but we're figuring it out. There's many different genes that could do this, but what's probable but overlooked in fire strains, when you get these ones that are susceptible, I don't know if any of you have ever tried to breed susceptibility out, and sometimes you breed it back to a resistant parent, and it still doesn't work. This is probably why. Whatever that susceptibility strain is, regardless of whether it makes 18% or 28%, it now probably also produces something called catalase, or something that destroys hydrogen peroxide, always. So as soon as you make it, so when I stained for these cells looking for hydrogen peroxide, I didn't see any, it's probable that as soon as I touched them with the fungus, and they immediately started to make hydrogen peroxide, they immediately destroyed it. Guys are like, that's really important. Yeah.
Doesn't sunlight also destroy hydrogen peroxide?
Craig was asking if sunlight also does. Sunlight also does destroy hydrogen peroxide. It's also not incredibly stable, but in this case, they're producing something that's probably constantly prevalent in the cell. So glutathione is maybe one thing, ascorbic acid is another, but I think it's an enzyme that these plants are getting. I mean, hydrogen peroxide is destroyed a lot of ways. The reason it works and it's so powerful is that it's so reactive. You know, you bomb a cell with it, it rips it apart, and it's like, oh, I'm free, I'm water and I'm oxygen again. But it destroyed whatever the hell it touched. It's reactive. But these cells are probably producing something that is present in high concentrations always throughout the entire plant, that no matter where they produce hydrogen peroxide, they instantly destroy it. And this is known in other plant species that actually have this issue, so I didn't come up with this myself. Cannabis is unique in that cycle, I mean, having 28% of anything per weight in your cell, that's unusual. And I mean, in terms of fungal susceptibility, it's unusual that it is this bad at fighting off an infection. And I believe it is because in the strains that have been hyperbred, like Bart pointed out, by virtue of the fact that they made them produce more THCA beyond that 20% limit, they also had to ramp up whatever this thing is that's destroying hydrogen peroxide. They had to, or those cells, they wouldn't have been selected for breeding because they would have killed themselves with the hydrogen peroxide they're making along with the THCA. Everyone kind of, I was going to have more of a slide on that, and I realized when I put biosynthetic pathways up there, people just go, I'll put it up on the website. Craig likes it. I will put that one up as an extra on the website because it is pretty cool. Okay, I am going to take a break. We can all socialize, and I'm going to get a drink. And thank you all for coming. We do this once a month.
Hey, keep it going for Frank Conrad. This is the second installment of Frank Talk. My name's Chris. I work for WorldVIRAL and Herman's Hideaway. Thank you so much for being here. Cool people kind of gravitate together, and that's why we're doing what we're doing. Also want to thank Colorado Green Lab and Colorado Harvest Company, the official and exclusive sponsor of WorldVIRAL TV. We're going to be doing this every month. Next time we will have food. If you guys want to stick around, we're going to be showing the LA game with San Fran. So don't go anywhere. Let's socialize.